good to be back. Welcome to Undoing Loneliness, Cultivating Social Connection. Woo, is this topic near and dear to my heart, like they all are, but this one especially now, right? Actually now, within the last 9 months, for a lot of us, we've been grappling with feeling disconnected from one another. So hopefully this talk will help to provide some hope and understanding and how to undo loneliness and to cultivate connection with one another if you're feeling like that's missing in your life right now. Just give you a quick snapshot for those who don't know who I am. Quickly, I've been in the health and wellness industry for about 25 years. This is my home state of Colorado that I live in now, and just moved here several months ago. But I've been professional counseling since 2005, and my specialty is health psychology. So I look at the influences on our mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual well-being. And boy, are we in the middle of a major one since March. So we'll talk about that. But another piece of what I do is corporate wellness consulting. So classes like these for communities and organizations. So today, what we're going to review are some research on loneliness. I just want to enlighten you on that if you're not aware of what impact loneliness has on mental, emotional, and physical health. And then I'm going to encourage you to evaluate your own current social situation. Okay, what's happening in your world? And then lastly, of course, we're going to explore very simple strategies, but very effective strategies for enhancing social connection so that we can feel less alone as we walk through our world and our days. Okay. Any questions that you have, please write those down. I'm going to take a few minutes in the middle and certainly at the end and file those off to Connor, and we'll definitely get those addressed. If you want to ask a question privately, I'll be providing my email at the end. You're more than welcome to email me directly. Some people have, and I welcome it. I will get back to you with a thoughtful response. So don't hesitate to do that if preferred. Okay, let's do this. I love these little guys. So when it comes to social connection, we are hardwired for it. Okay, it's very primal. It's a fundamental need. And when it's missing, we suffer. Okay, we aren't meant to be isolated and alone. Even the most introverted among us, we need other people. The level to which we need that will depend on the person, but we definitely need the social connection. Now, we are in the midst of a loneliness epidemic, but I want to say that actually was present before COVID. Okay, so medical experts around the world were urging the public health officials to make loneliness a public health issue. Now, in America alone, the percentage of Americans who say that they're lonely has doubled, more than doubled, between the mid-'80s and 2016. This is a longitudinal research study done. Again, this is pre-COVID, okay? So on average, what they found too is that 25% of Americans said that they have no one to confide in, that the number of close friends that Americans had in 1985 was on average 3, and flash forward to 2004, and that number dropped to 1. Now that's in 2004. So that alone, what's been happening in the world since then. Like I said, this isn't just relegated to the United States. This is something that's growing worldwide. The UK actually in 2018 assigned or appointed a Ministry of Loneliness to help with what is an epidemic in their country around the experience of loneliness among people of all demographics, by the way. And so this is an issue, and it's certainly much more of an issue now that we find ourselves in the kind of the COVID era. Look, the quality and the quantity of our social connections is linked to not only our mental health, but also to our physical health and longevity. There have been dozens and dozens of research studies done on this very thing, on the impact of loneliness on our health and well-being. Okay, so this is definitely been researched to death. And this issue matters because, look, we all feel lonely sometimes. I think it's part of being human. But chronic loneliness is a whole different category of its own. There is a well-known TED Talk that I want to point you toward if you want to learn more information on this too, is that it's done by Susan Pinker. It's called The Secret to Living Long May Be Your Social Life. It's TED.com. Her name is Susan Pinker, and she's a psychologist. She compiled the research, right? She looked at the research behind the impact of what are the indicators of early mortality, the top 10 predictors of early mortality. Now, to give you an idea of how this is fascinating, number 10 is lack of clean air. Okay, number 7 is lack of exercise, so we got to get moving. Number 4, alcohol dependence. Okay, number 3, I thought number 3 was going to be number 1, but it's not. Number 3 is smoking. The top 2 predictors of early mortality have to do with our social connections. Number 2 is lack of close personal relationships. Okay, even if it's just one person that we can talk with, be seen with. Number 1, the number 1 predictor of early mortality was lack of social interaction. These aren't your BFFs, okay? These are the people that you see at the coffee shop, at your gym, church, out and about. Since March, that has come to a screeching halt overnight for many of us, and some of that's starting to get trickled back in, but that has been a huge impact. Social distancing has been a major player in our mental, emotional, and physical well-being. Gatherings of all kinds have been stopped, from sporting events and church gatherings to gyms. School, that's been trickling back in, right? But we also have this fear of this second wave and third wave. Work connections, a lot of us are working remotely, right? So this has really been a major, major change for all of us and around the world. It's unprecedented territory, okay? And what's important now more than ever is to be creative with connecting back with one another, okay? I don't like this term, social distancing. I don't like it. We don't want to socially distance. There is a need, right, for physically distancing and wearing masks and being safe. But we need to make sure that we're prioritizing our social connections with one another, that we're not cocooning and walling off too much, despite the challenge of those, what we took for granted before, those social connections and interactions being kind of right at our fingertips, right, walk out our door. Look, our fundamental need, our health and well-being is certainly, it's powerfully related to this area of health. What I find is a challenge with this, though, is the experience of loneliness. I have to say, if there's any few silver linings of the pandemic, it's that the topic of loneliness is much more discussed, okay? It's much more front and center. I work with a lot of clients over the years where loneliness is the primary reason that brings them to counseling. What some of them are sharing with me now is that, you know what, I feel less lonely in my loneliness because other people get it. I'm not the only one. And what's happening is there's much more of a dialogue and a normalizing of this experience. But sometimes, you know, when it comes to the obstacles to reaching out, when we're feeling disconnected and lonely, there's usually, I find, top 3 reasons. One is that admitting we're lonely can feel like, gosh, I'm failing at one of the most fundamental needs of being human, right? Which is a sense of belonging and love and connection. So there could be this shame that is being experienced of like, I don't want anyone to know. They might think, what's wrong with me that I can't have these connections? Whereas it is much, much more common than people realize, right? Because they're quiet about it. They don't speak about it to anyone because of the shame that might be there. It's stigmatized, okay? Although that's getting a little better because of this collective experience of it now. We also might be protective, right? So if we're experiencing chronic loneliness, we might have been programmed from a young age, for whatever reason, that reaching out and being seen was not safe. Okay, so this really depends on the person. Another reason that we might not have these connections is that, gosh, as we get older, life happens. and sometimes we lose our tribe, whether through death, loss of loved one and friends, or we move and at endings of things change. And so there could be circumstances certainly in play that actually kind of come in and actually create a different experience of social connectivity. We can find ourselves grappling with loneliness, certainly because of COVID. I mean, that's a big one for a lot of us, right? But transitions are a big piece of that puzzle for many people. With that said, what I want you to do right now is kind of do a loneliness / social connection audit. Assess for yourself, where do your connections stand right now? What is working for you? What is not? How and with who do you feel connected or not? What has changed since March or not? There was a funny meme on Facebook a while back. I'm not on social media so much, but I just remember seeing this and you're like, yeah, I'm at home, I'm by myself all day, I don't talk to many people, so same as it ever was, So I think that was put in by probably an introvert, right? So for some folks, it's like, yeah, this is more of the same, but maybe intensified because it is. And for other people, it can be, wow, this is not what I'm used to. This is very, very different. I find for a lot of us, we fall into that camp, even the most introverted among us. But looking at what's different, what's the same, what's changed, there is a wonderful resource that I want to point you toward. If you want to take a survey and kind of do an assessment and see, where do I land on this? As far as maybe some social isolation and loneliness and disconnect. Connect to Affect is a great resource. I'll talk more about it in here a little bit, but it's powered by the AART Foundation. But there is a survey on there that's for people of all ages, by the way, okay, where it helps you to assess what your current connection is or is not. So I highly recommend taking that to see how you rate, to get more information about your current situation. The key with this is that, in order to undo loneliness, no matter what's contributing to it, our own personal stuff, and then since March, the COVID stuff, and all of the above, whatever is contributing to it, we need to give it a voice, okay? Only then, when we give it a voice and assess it, can we actually open ourselves up to taking steps toward creating a shift and what might feel very, very overwhelming and like, I don't even know where to begin. Giving a voice to it allows us to invite people in to that experience. And it helps to destigmatize the experience of what can, for many people, feel very, very shameful. And I also want to normalize too, that we can have people around us, but feel very lonely. So you can be lonely, but not alone. Okay, that's its own separate category, I find. And examples of that might be you're in a relationship where you're living parallel lives, but there's no connection of being seen with one another. Okay, so that's a lonely but not alone. Or you have a lot of friends, but it's more functioning, which is better than nothing because social interactions matter. But maybe you're not allowing, or there's not a skill set of anyone in life right now to allow you in and have those deeper connections. So I just want to say that there's also not just that we're missing social interactions, there could be that we're not getting a little bit deeper within those connections that we do have. So there could be a loneliness experience. What I want to do now is take some questions before I dive into how do we begin to turn the tide and create connections where some might not be within this realm of physically distancing with one another. So, but before I do that, I want to open up. Are there any questions, any comments, any thoughts percolating as based on what you've heard so far?
Erin, would you mind just repeating the name of the podcast so I can type it in the chat?
Yes, it's so it's TED.com, and let me pull it up here. It is with Susan Pinker. So even if you Google Susan Pinker, but let me see here. Hold on one second. It's right here. It's called "The Secret to Living Long May Be Your Social Life."
Okay, thank you. We don't have any other questions besides that.
Okay, great. So let's dive into how to do this, how to create social connection, especially now with the new norm of physically distancing and our social gatherings being severely limited. These strategies are simple, okay? They're going to be simple. What I find when chronic loneliness is being experienced, and like I said, it's much more of a collective experience right now in this world, usually overwhelm is right there with it. And where there's overwhelm, there's typically some depression. So it all can kind of get mixed in together. And when we're feeling all of those intense experiences and feelings, the idea of trying to figure out where to start can feel like too much. And then rather than actually taking a step and creating connection, you might cocoon. We might turn more inward. It actually feels more protective sometimes to turn more inward rather than to reach out and to be vulnerable and to be seen, right? But a little goes a long way. So I'm going to walk you through some very simple strategies. The first thing I want to point out is that the research shows that, like I said, our social interactions matter. So the quantity does matter as far as just having those conversations. Even if it's functioning up here on more of a surface level, it matters. But so does quality, right? So those close personal relationships matter. Feelings, like it's a human desire and need to feel seen, felt, heard, understood, accepted, not judged, right? To show up in a relationship and just kind of let it all hang out. Some of us have that right now, some of us don't. And if you don't, it doesn't mean something's wrong. It just means that there needs to be a bridge to help. There needs to be a way in which to help bridge that gap, and I'll talk about that. But they both matter. So these connections, though, we want to have, they need to be positive. Okay, we can have a lot of people around us, but maybe they're not such positive interactions, depending on who is in our world and who's in our circle of trust, as well as our acquaintances. So we want to make sure that those influences are positive and of good quality, okay? And the way to be able to kind of do a litmus test on that is to, how do you feel after talking with them? How do you feel after being in their presence, if it's people that you're still physically near, right? We want to be able to have a sense of feeling good after those experiences. Within the close personal relationships, I want to normalize that it's not about having a long list of close personal relationships. It's having one or two, okay? And one of the questions that I get from a lot of folks actually is like, well, Erin, what if I'm an introvert? What do I do with that? You know, it's not second nature to just kind of put myself out there and to initiate conversation and to do that. So it can feel like, someone can feel like there's a whole skill set that they have to learn in order to have social connection. But this is the deal. A little goes a long way. Okay, so again, most introverted among us, we need social connection. Now, I want to explain the difference between introversion and extroversion. Introversion, it just means this. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily shy. It just means that the way in which introverted people regroup and re-energize is by being alone. So they need maybe a lot more alone time than, say, someone who's an extrovert. An extrovert gets their energy and they energize from being around other people. Who do you think has had a harder time since March, when now that these social gatherings have been, halted? I'm hearing a lot from the extroverted clients that I have that this is like really hard. But it's hard for all of us, but it's understanding that we all need some. I have a picture of a snow leopard, because snow leopard in the wild is actually known as a very elusive and solitary creature. Okay, but even this creature connects with other snow leopards sometimes to mate. Okay, so it's very primal. It's a fundamental need. And the amount of interaction that we need will absolutely depend on your introversion versus extrovert. You could be an ambivert, which is somewhere in the middle, okay? But just kind of thinking about that, it depends on our temperament, our personality. But again, that's where that assessment that I mentioned earlier will help you to determine, okay, where am I landing now as far as what's happening with my social connection versus my sense of loneliness or isolation. When it comes to figuring out how do I do this, I say start with who you know. Start there. Look through your phone, look at your contacts, or look at your email contact, whatever it is that helps to kind of like go down the list, like who haven't I talked to in a while that I could actually pick up the phone or Zoom or email or connect over Facebook messaging, whatever speaks to you. Can I start with that person first? I guarantee you, almost can guarantee you that they're going to appreciate you reaching out as much as the connection that you get from initiating that contact. Start with who you know. These can be circle of trust people. These can be people that you haven't talked to in a while. These can be people that you just enjoy and like, okay? They don't have to be your BFF. But start there. Reaching out is definitely a vulnerable action, right? It may feel awkward, especially if you're used to cocooning and maybe having other people initiate that for you. But start there. This is kind of the beauty of email or text, is that if it helps to kind of step into or preempt maybe a phone call or a Zoom or some kind of video call, start there. And then from there, I would say make sure that you have some of these connections on a regular basis, weekly Zoom call chats, weekly phone calls with people that you feel close with or that you like to talk with. Start there. If for any reason, as I mentioned before, you're in a circumstance in your life where you're like, I got nothing, I don't have those folks in my world right now. Again, it doesn't mean anything is wrong. Okay, that's just the season of life that you're in right now. That's it. Okay, and with that, what can help to bridge that gap so that you're not just alone in your head all day is, of course, I'm a therapist, so I'm going to say this, but let me tell you, this is much more accessible than it's ever been because of teletherapy. Reach out. Therapists, we're in this profession because we love to be of service and we genuinely care. Okay, most of us do, hopefully. And so I usually refer people to these few options here. Psychologytoday.com is a great resource to find a therapist in your state. What's interesting about teletherapy now, again, one of the other silver linings of COVID is that you don't have to work with someone in your zip code. You just need to work with someone who is licensed in the state that you reside in. Okay, so it really opens up, who's accessible, what you have access to as far as some online therapy. It's more the norm now than it ever has been. The second option is if you're employed and you have an EAP option, use it. Okay, it's very low cost, if not free, depending on your company. Look, therapists are legally and confidentially bound by keeping everything confidential. Okay, so the third one is insurance. If you have mental health benefits, use it. Okay, it's very affordable. It can offset the cost of that. So that can help to bridge that gap if you're finding yourself feeling like I have no one to reach out to talk with, or I don't really want to talk with certain people about what's really kind of going on in my head and my heart. This can help to really provide that safe space to do just that. The other thing is, look, virtual connections are now also a norm, right? Here we are connecting virtually is better than nothing. And it matters and it makes a difference. With virtual connections, I'm going to go back to this website, Connect to Effect. This is through AARP. This is also a resource to help to connect volunteers with organizations that have needs. This can be virtually, in person, whatever your comfort zone is, okay, especially now. You put in your zip code and it pulls up what's in your area. Research shows that when we show up in our service for others, it helps to lessen our own experience of loneliness. Because in that act of helping others, we feel purposeful, right? We feel like, okay, it's a win-win situation for sure. This other website, meetup.com. It's not a dating site, that's Match. Okay, meetup.com is wonderful. You just put in your zip code and again, it pulls up the clubs in your area. A lot of these clubs are going virtual. Some of them are still meeting outside. So there's some options in there, but it allows you to, even if it's virtual, to find people with like-minded interests, like book clubs, crafting, writing clubs, any kind of outdoor activity. But I would say research on that to see what you find. You might be surprised. It's a wonderful resource, and a lot of my clients are finding that to be very useful, especially now. This other one I just stumbled on this last week, and I think it's pretty cool. It's called Link Ages, and it's membership based, and they're offering, I believe, a free membership right now that's very basic because of COVID, to really allow families to stay connected with one another. It's a very user-friendly app to help with the ease of connection. I think sometimes, I don't know about you, but I'm technologically challenged, so I'm like, if it's not easy, I'm not going to do it. But I guess their marketing is that they make staying connected super easy. So it's something to check out. It's actually used for communities as well, but that might be an option for you. I can't believe I'm going to say this. The social media might be your saving grace, okay? Especially now. Look, these connections are better than nothing, especially now. This is where we need to be creative, but I want to also caution that this will really depend on the person, depending on how you're using social media. Right now, it could be fuel to the fire if we're getting a lot of information that way that is stress-inducing, anxiety-producing. Okay, so this is where the assessment is going to be helpful. How's it working for you, or how's it not? Maybe this is helping to stay connected. Maybe this is adding more stress than it's worth. But this can be of use. You know, going back to the research on loneliness, when you think about the contributors to loneliness, whenever I ask people, what do you think has been the top contributor? Usually people point their finger at social media. The answer to that is yes and no. Depends on the person. For some people, social media has helped with virtual connections where none were there before. That's better than nothing, right? Remember that TED Talk. Whereas other people, it's been toxic. Okay, and something in between. So then assess for yourself. Use it if it works, let it go if it doesn't. This next one is, look, especially with physically distancing, right? You know, the research behind being safe, especially with what's happening in the world, is outside connection is better than no connection. So I know a lot of the states are getting colder. I know it is in the state that I live in, so I got my turtleneck on. But bundle up, get outside, meet a friend. I know restaurants around town, depending on where you live, are being more creative with outdoor gathering spaces that are heated. And so this is where we got to get creative. We got to think outside the box and make sure that we're not falling into the mindset of all or nothing. Well, if I can't do it all this way, then I'm not going to have any connection at all. We got to meet somewhere in the middle and be creative and really find a way to make it happen rather than just default to, I'm not doing this. The next two slides have to do with your own connection to your self-care. Now, I spent two talks, presentations. My first two ones were around this topic, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. But if you didn't see those, I would say revisit them, because our connection to self right now absolutely matters. Not just connections with others, but connections to our own self-care, our own fundamental needs. When we feel better, we make better self-care choices, okay? When we're in survival mode, we make survival mode choices. So if we're feeling lonely, that's a source of chronic stress, right? So in order to really shift that, we want to reach out, but we also want to be able to align with what it is that's going to make us feel better mentally, emotionally, and physically throughout our days. Better sleep, regular movement, mindfulness. I know you had a meditation class last week, okay? Start there. Nourishing our body with better foods. And so these are going to really matter. It's really asking yourself the question of what replenishes you, what fills you up, what invites a sense of calm. And there is a difference I want to point out between the experience of solitude and loneliness. Okay, solitude is the sense of enjoying our own company. It's being creative with enjoying your own company. It's quality time with self. Loneliness is usually it's a negative, it feels like a negative experience, but solitude becomes, how are you enjoying your own company? are you being creative with that? Are you allowing yourself to say, gosh, how could I, if I have more alone time than I ever asked for, how can I make the best use of that, right? Not only just through self-care, but through those enjoyable activities that I like. I worked with a woman who brought in piano playing more, and it is a solitary, certainly, activity by its very nature. And so she got kind of much more involved in that, and it's been hugely rewarding for her. So this matters too. Time with self, time with others. What are some simple things that you can do to begin connecting with other people today, so that you're not feeling so alone in what feels like the new norm, and also what feels like the sense of enduring what is? We need to open up those windows of opportunity to allow people into our world. Okay, that's all I got. Any questions? I know I laid it on you. Any questions about any of what I covered?
Erin, we have a question about the holidays are coming up. We've got Thanksgiving, Christmas, and things are going to look pretty different this year. Do you have any tips or strategies just to sort of help people get through that, because they might not be seeing family like they were, things like that?
Very good question. I just had a session this morning where that was brought up with somebody, and it's been a recurring question with my clientele. This is where we need to be creative. Okay, so it's our own personal comfort. I think it's about talking with loved ones around, as a group. If you're used to getting together with your group, talking about it through Zoom or whatever feels comfortable around, okay, what should we do this year? Some ideas that people are doing is like a Zoom holiday where they bring their own meal and they're just eating, but at least they can see the familiar faces of who they're normally in person with during the holidays. That's one creative way, if that feels more comfortable. Outdoor gatherings, if again, the research behind that is much safer, that might be a better bet. This is where it's kind of tuning into, well, what we all have our own personal comfort level with this. So tuning in, what do you need to feel safe? Talk it out with those people that you normally get together with, and then come to some middle ground, some compromise on what might work for you for this year. This is an unusual year. It's going to be an unusual time. I think the holidays, especially if we live alone and we don't have those connections or maybe regular gatherings that are even happening even before COVID, this can be, it'll be really important to think about, well, how can I potentially be in a community that allows for that connection, or at least via Zoom allow that too. So it's going to require some thought and some assessing and some planning ahead, so that we don't kind of get left holding the bag around that. Good question. It's a common one.
Another question is, would you comment on how to improve your kind of new community? Let's say you've just moved into a retirement community or a new neighborhood or something like that, or you maybe have moved to a new city. How would you kind of tell somebody to sort of, put themselves out there and make new friends and strengthen those relationships?
How would you encourage someone to do that? Is that what that person means?
Yes.
Yeah.
How would you encourage? Yeah. what would you tell them?
Basically, there's a loved one that's going through that, like feeling like they got their tribe is not there. They're in a new space. The meetup.com has been really helpful for folks. I would recommend that as a resource. And then, especially if someone is feeling shy and vulnerable, like, I don't know where to start. This is where, again, it depends on that person's comfort level as far as the being safe, but being out in public, right? Like gyms, you can wear masks depending on being outside. But within the community, it's going to be about seeing what those community connections are. It's really going to depend on where that person is living and what those points of contact are. But I would say it's just kind of maybe, as much as you can, work with that person and help kind of walk alongside that person in problem solving. I also want to just caution that there's a readiness for this too. So some people, even though they might know up here, like, yeah, I could be doing this, but I keep not. If we can be patient with that person's process of finding their way through it, we can offer suggestions, but then and then check in. Don't just kind of like, good luck with that. I doubt that whoever's asking that would do it. But it's like how to check in periodically, and not like, hey, did you do that yet? But like, hey, how are you doing? How's it going? that will matter. That will matter as they're trying to navigate this transition of being in a new community.
And then how about, can neighborhood listservs be used to expand your social contacts?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it depends on the listserv, sure. You know, look, a community matters. You know, I think however we're getting our community and connections, use it. I just moved to an apartment community where every day there's kind of an update and people will chime in and help each other. Hey, where are the nearest walking trails? And if you have something like that accessible, use it, even if it's just a benign question that you're like, I already know the answer, but at least you might be able to meet some people that way. I don't know. Again, this is where it's important to be creative and to think outside of the box and to certainly touch into that space of feeling awkward and maybe the resistance that comes up in response to that. But any opportunity that you have that is a community connection in a way in which to have those even virtual conversations will absolutely matter. They will matter.
What are some ways that you can tell that you are very lonely or feeling depressed or overwhelmed for some folks who might not be able to recognize that in themselves?
Good question. I want to definitely point you to the connect2affect.org survey. It's short and sweet. You don't have to provide your email, okay? And it gives you back immediate results. It's very, very anonymous. That will help you to kind of assess, where do I stand on this? But some of the signs and symptoms would be usually when chronic loneliness is there, usually depression is right there with it. Okay, it could be a sense of hopelessness. I have no interest in doing the things that I used to enjoy doing. There could be this sense of going to what I call false fixes to kind of get through the day, the experience of feeling lonely. These are the self-soothing coping mechanisms that aren't so nourishing and nurturing, but they work in the moment, like emotional eating, emotional drinking, chronic TV watching. I'm just going to escape my experience. Sleeping a lot is a good indication too. Okay. Crying a lot, just overwhelmed. So this is where a therapist can really help to bridge that gap, especially if we're feeling too vulnerable to reach out to a community, because that might feel overwhelming. Even if we're feeling too vulnerable or afraid to reach out to people that we trust, because we're like, I don't want people to know this, reach out to a professional. But usually the indication of that is it becomes like we cocoon and we turn inward even more. That's usually a big, big sign that, okay, in order to come out of that cocoon, I got to be able to find someone that I can talk to uncensored, even if that's a professional, that will provide that bridge to maybe diving into connections with other people when ready. That's a very good question.
Take
that survey.
Yeah. What's the survey again?
It's connect2affect.org.
Oh, okay. Got it.
And there's a survey, loneliness questionnaire in there, and I highly recommend taking that.
Okay. We had another comment. Someone lost their mother in July and they're feeling very lonely and they're just sort of trying to stay busy to, kind of avoid the grief, but how to sort of get through that.
Yeah, I'm sorry for your loss, first of all. When it comes to grief and loss, when you think about the circumstances that can contribute to loneliness, this is one of them. Losing a loved one where they had this presence in your life that's no longer there. So it kind of creates this abyss, right, that we're looking into, of like a void. And when it comes to that void of missing that person and that connection, that loneliness is right there, and grieving that person and missing that person is right there, right? And so what's important here is distraction's okay. Okay, it's okay. I find that grief is so complicated that we want to do whatever we can do we try and show up the best we can for ourselves, and distraction can be this nice way to try to get through. I have to say, in my past with working with clientele who've lost loved ones, worked with a lot of widows, and they dipped into emotional, I'm not saying let's all emotionally eat, but like it got them through the height of what felt like they're going to drown in their grief. It got them through that part. and into this place of actually being able to get to a place of, okay, now I'm ready to let go of the emotional eating, and now I'm ready to dive into maybe more effective self-care strategies. But we have to also respect that there's a time and there's a readiness. And with grief, it's going to be one day at a time. And how do we actually make sure that distractions help? What are your other connections? Who else can you talk with? Journaling, sometimes journaling and almost talking to the loved one that's gone is actually quite helpful. It sounds kind of strange maybe, but it actually kind of, in our mind, it actually makes us feel like we're with that person for some people. So distractions are okay. What are your other connection points? And again, therapy can help with that too if there's no other connection points right now. But if there are, definitely reach out to those people too. Other questions?
Any other questions from anybody? I think that is it for today, Erin.
Okay, I know this is a heavy topic, so definitely check out some of these resources, and know that you're not, if you're feeling alone and disconnected for whatever reason, you're not alone in your loneliness. It doesn't make it easier to navigate, but one day at a time, one little step at a time, and that will absolutely make a big difference. Okay, wish you well.
Thank you so much, Erin. Do you want to briefly chat about next week's presentation?
Yeah, next week I'm going to be talking on harnessing the inner critic, another lighthearted conversation. But what's going on up here, especially in light of what's happening, but how it usually has to do with perfectionism thinking and how we can be kinder to ourselves. I did a TED talk on this very topic, and it's very, again, like a lot of these, near and dear to my heart, but I love it. We'll talk about how to be more gentle with ourselves, to undo negative self-talk, and to step alongside more self-compassion. So we'll talk about that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for everything today, Erin. And we will see you next Wednesday, November 4th, right after Election Day. So we'll see how we're doing this time next week.
Okay. All right.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Be safe and let us know if you need anything. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.